Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're going to completely strip away centuries of abstract mythology and embark on a rigorous academic investigation. We are going to demystify Japan's very first deity, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi. For far too long, this figure has been viewed simply as a faceless cosmic creator. But understanding this shift from abstract myth to grounded history is absolutely crucial because it entirely redefines how we read our most foundational texts. By analyzing ancient geography, linguistic morphology, and strict statistical records, we're going to reconstruct a vivid, physical history. We are looking for a real pioneer.
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for this investigation. First, the mystery of the first deity. Second, decoding the ancient name. Third, colonizing Taka-Ama-Hara. Fourth, the Okami anomaly. Fifth, tracing the Goto origins. And finally, the historical reality revealed. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. Mystery of the First Deity, the Blank Slate. In the traditional abstract view of history, this ancient figure is treated almost like a blank slate. It's more of a concept than a flesh-and-blood person. Just look at this foundational quote from the ancient text, the Kojiki. At the time of the beginning of heaven and earth, there came into existence in Taka-Ama-Hara a deity named Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi. And well, that's essentially it. That is all we get. There are no detailed historical actions, no grand dialogues, and absolutely no lineage recorded in the central Ko records. He literally just appears and then immediately fades into the background.
This severe lack of detail really forces us to ask, who was the real Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi? Was he truly just a faceless, static, cosmic creator? Or have we been reading these texts entirely wrong? Today, we're going to pivot away from the sky and look down toward the physical earth and sea to find our answer. Section 2. Decoding the ancient name, a linguistic demystification.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that the key to unlocking his true identity doesn't lie in heavenly skies, but in breaking down the ancient Jomon vocabulary itself. The linguistic morphology here is just fascinating. Ame traditionally translates as sea, Naka means middle, and Nushi means a village chief or headman. So when you put it all together, it literally translates to the village chief in the middle of the sea, right? The language itself points directly to a localized pioneer, definitely not some supreme, untouchable cosmic ruler.
To really grasp this, we have to put ourselves in the ancient world view. In the ancient Jomon vocabulary, the word Ame strictly referred to the physical sea. There was absolutely no abstract conceptual word for heaven or some ethereal sky. For those ancient people, the boundless, dangerous physical frontier, specifically the turbulent waters of the Tsushima Strait, that was their Ame.
Section 3. Colonizing Taka-Ama-Hara, the geographic stage.
So, let's move our investigation to the physical geographic stage where this early colonization actually took place. Walking through this timeline during the Jomon era, we see significant geological sea level rise. This effectively separated landmasses, turning Iki Island into an isolated body completely surrounded by water. Now, this physical separation, that is the real-world reality behind the myth of the beginning of heaven and earth. This island of Iki was the true, physical Taka-Ama-Hara. At the initial settlement, the very first footsteps on this newly isolated land were taken by Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi. But, as we see moving into the later era, this early colonization was eventually usurped. It was taken over by the arrival of advanced groups bringing new maritime crafts, tools, and immense political power.
And we can starkly contrast the resulting titles right here. On one side, we have Nushi, a village chief, the early colonizer. This was essentially a modest title retroactively assigned to him by the Central Ko authority. But on the flip side, we have Okami, the supreme sovereign. This was the ultimate title claimed by the later, much more powerful arrivals like Takagi no Okami, who seized control of Taka-Ama-Hara. So basically, the Central Ko narrative politically marginalized our early pioneer, making sure his descendants would only remember him as a simple Nushi.
Section 4. The Okami statistical anomaly, the definitive proof.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because to really appreciate the evidence here, we need to understand a strict religious rule. In this tradition, the name and title of a deity are absolute. They simply cannot be arbitrarily changed, elevated, or altered by local shrines, priests, or worshippers. A name is an immutable historical identity. And this strict rigidity is exactly what makes the shrine records we are about to look at an irrefutable piece of historical evidence.
And this brilliantly illustrates the anomaly I'm talking about. Look at this comparison of shrine records. In Fukuoka Prefecture, there are 16 shrines dedicated to this deity, but only a single one uses the Supreme Okami title. However, jump over to Nagasaki Prefecture, and out of just 10 shrines, a staggering 4 of them defiantly use the Supreme Okami title. Completely against the rigid rules of the central Kojuno narrative, these shrines elevate him from a mere Nushi straight to a supreme sovereign.
When we break down those 4 rebellious Nagasaki shrines even further, a super striking geographic pattern emerges. 3 out of the 4 are hyper-concentrated in one very specific remote area, the Mina-Matsuura district.
Section 5. Tracing the Goto origins. Pinpointing the source.
3. That is the exact number of specific shrines, Tuko, Mabushi, and Takigawa-Hara. This number essentially acts as a geographic focal point, bottlenecking the data and leading us straight to the truth. These 3 shrines are located exclusively in the Minami-Matsuura district of the Goto Islands. Now, why does this matter? Well, because local ancestral memory is incredibly powerful. The people here preserved his supreme Okami status in stubborn defiance of the central Koa narrative that tried so hard to diminish him to just a Nushi. To the people of this specific district, he wasn't just some distant, abstract village chief. He was their revered ancestral pioneer. He was their supreme sovereign. This massive anomaly proves, absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this exact region was his historical staging ground.
Section 6. The historical reality revealed. From myth to pioneer.
So, let's synthesize the physical geography, the linguistics, and the statistical evidence into our final historical truth. If we look all the way back at the earliest mythological texts regarding the birth of the islands, the Goto Islands are referred to as Chikunoshima. And crucially, in these ancient records, this location carries the title of Ame, meaning the sea. The Goto Islands were recognized right from the very beginning as the ultimate maritime gateway. They were the literal edge of the known physical world.
So, the crucial point is this. When we strip away all the abstract cosmic mythology, we don't just find empty space. We find a flesh and blood historical pioneer. Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi actually originated from the Minamatsuura district in the Goto Islands. He courageously navigated the treacherous Tsushima Strait to become the very first colonizer of Taka-Ama-Hara. But, as we've seen, his physical legacy was later politically marginalized by subsequent rulers with much more advanced capabilities, the Central Ko powers, who eventually expanded their supreme authority all the way into Yamato.
Which leaves us with an incredibly profound question. If our most abstract, supposedly untouchable cosmic deity was, in reality, a flesh and blood maritime pioneer from the Goto Islands, well, what other physical, historical truths are hiding in plain sight within our oldest texts? History is written by the victors, for sure, but as we've seen today, the real truth often survives in the soil, the language, and the local memory. Keep questioning the myths. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.
What if I told you that the supreme, untouchable creator god of an entire nation's mythology, being described for centuries as just a pure, abstract cosmic void, was actually just a salt-stained flesh and blood sailor?
I mean, it sounds completely absurd when you put it like that, right?
Right, it really does. But welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on a journey to decode a massive historical mystery.
Yeah, and our mission here is to basically strip away centuries of mystical theology, all that dense philosophical architecture.
Exactly. We want to find the actual human being who first colonized the ancient seas. You are about to see how a greedy pioneer's real physical life was just, well, completely swallowed up by myth.
Leaving behind this sort of narrative ghost, to set the stage for you, we really have to look at the very beginning of the written records.
You mean the definitive angel chronicles, right? Like the Kojiki and the Nihon-Shoki.
Yes, exactly those. When you open these texts, the absolute first deity to appear is a figure named Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi.
And he emerges at the dawn of the universe in a specific place.
Right. He does. A place called Taka-Ama-Hara. And for our exploration today, the ancient pronunciation we must keep in mind for this location is Taka-Ama-Hara.
Taka-Ama-Hara, got it.
Right. So he appears there as a solitary god, meaning, he has no partner, no consort.
The text gives him this supreme primacy, basically placing him at the absolute center of creation.
Yeah, but then almost comically, he just vanishes.
I know, it's so weird. The very next sentence tells us he instantly hides himself.
Right, there are no grand stories of his deeds, no detailed lineage, no dialogue at all.
No heroic battles against monsters or rival factions. He just leaves this massive narrative void.
It is entirely passive. It's like opening the definitive, sprawling history book of a mighty empire, and the very first chapter just says John existed, and then the author completely moves on to someone else for the rest of the 1,000-page volume.
That is the perfect analogy. If this figure is the supreme first presence of the entire cosmology, why is he so entirely passive?
Well, scholars have wrestled with that exact paradox for generations, you know. The subsequent figures in the text are the ones who actually forge the physical world.
Right, they establish territories and dictate the political landscape.
Exactly. Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi serves merely as a placeholder, just an empty vessel positioned at the beginning of time.
So, to understand who this figure really was, we have to abandon the traditional approach entirely, right?
We do. We must stop reading these ancient texts as abstract theology. Instead, we really have to treat them as heavily coded records of ancient geopolitics.
Geopolitics and physical geography. And the first step in this physical historical decoding requires us to radically retranslate his very name.
Yeah, let's do some linguistic archaeology here, because this is where the facade of the cosmic god really starts to crack.
Okay, so the name Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi is written with specific characters. The instinct is to look at what those characters mean in a modern context, right?
Or even a classical theological context. But we have to look past that. We have to uncover what those sounds and symbols actually meant to the ancient indigenous people.
The people speaking the ancient Jomon tongue.
Exactly. So we can break the name down syllable by syllable. The first part is aim.
And if you look at the written character used for aim in the chronicles, it translates directly to sky or heaven, right?
It does. And for centuries, theologians have read it strictly in that vertical sense, assuming he is a god reigning over the clouds.
But, and this is a huge impeller, but in the ancient indigenous Jomon language of the islands, there was absolutely no concept for a divine heaven in the sky.
None at all. To the people living on those shores, the empty air above their heads was a separate, unremarkable concept. It was simply Sora.
Wow. So what did aim actually mean to them?
The word aim strictly meant sea.
That is a massive paradigm shift for you listening to absorb. By swapping the sky for the sea, we are taking a mythology that looks up and forcing it to look outward.
Exactly. Aim does not mean peering into the clouds for divine intervention. It means standing on the shoreline, staring out at the vast, formidable water.
Because the sea was their ultimate frontier. Right, it was the source of their livelihood.
Their livelihood, the pathway for their migrations, and, you know, the greatest, most unpredictable danger they faced.
So their cosmology was horizontal, bounded by the horizon of the ocean, not vertical.
Spot on. So aim is the physical sea. Following that, we have the syllables no and me.
Okay, what do those do?
No is a standard connective particle functioning like of they, and me is a profound, ancient honorific.
Like a marker of deep respect.
Exactly. It's a marker of respect that we later see integrated into grand royal titles.
Okay, so that gives us the honored sea. Then we hit Naka, which is a word that I think has retained its meaning incredibly well over the millennia.
Yeah, it literally means middle or center.
But the final part of the name is where the geopolitical reality really snaps into focus, right? Nushi.
Nushi is the absolute key to unlocking his human identity. In later eras, people hear a grand title and assume it implies supreme dominion.
Like a king ruling over a massive empire.
Right. But within the localized, survival-driven structure of ancient maritime societies, Nushi does not mean a monarch.
It doesn't denote a king who rules over vast territories or collects taxes.
Not at all. Nushi roughly translates to a local village chief.
A village chief, wow.
In the specific context of an unexplored hostile frontier, it means an early settler or a pioneer.
So it is a title of localized communal respect earned through practical leadership.
Exactly. Not an inherited mandate to rule the cosmos.
Putting all those linguistic puzzle pieces together changes the entire trajectory of the text.
It really does. If we bypass the later theological projections and use the ancient physical meanings of these Jomon words...
His name doesn't mean Lord of the Center of Heaven.
No. It means the chief of the islands in the middle of the sea.
The cosmic supreme god literally evaporates the moment you apply that translation. You were suddenly looking at a physical pioneer.
You are looking at the very first human leader to step ashore and establish a working, surviving settlement in a terrifying maritime realm.
The name records a grueling, physical, human achievement. He was a local headman of an isolated, saltwater-drenched outpost.
Yeah, I mean, I try to put myself in the worn-out sandals of this man.
Right. He's managing a group of foragers and sailors, finding fresh water, securing food from the tide pool.
Building shelters that can withstand typhoons.
Yeah.
He's keeping his people alive on a patch of land surrounded by churning water.
That is a radically different legacy than a solitary spirit floating in an ethereal void.
Completely different. But this immediately raises a massive geographic question for us to figure out.
Where exactly was this middle of the sea? Because the ancient maritime world is incredibly vast.
Right. To find the actual physical footprint of this chief, we can't just point to a random spot on a modern map.
We have to look back at the violent, terrifying geological events of ancient history.
We really must anchor the myth in the physical reality of the Earth's climate cycles.
Okay, so take us back. What was happening?
Well, following the end of the last ice age, a globe experienced a significant, sustained period of warming.
So the massive continental glaciers melted.
Exactly. They poured unimaginable volumes of water into the oceans, and global sea levels rose dramatically.
And in the context of the Japanese archipelago, this massive environmental shift has a specific geological name, right?
Yes, it's known geologically as the Jomon transgression.
The Jomon transgression. And this wasn't just a sudden biblical flood that happened overnight, right?
No, not at all. This is a slow, relentless, creeping terror over generations.
Water just swallowing the coastlines, erasing familiar hunting grounds, and completely reshaping the map.
Picture the landscape of the ancient Kyushu mainland before this transgression. The landmass stretched much further out into the surrounding waters.
So there were broad valleys and actual terrestrial land bridges.
Yeah. But as the sea levels relentlessly rose, those lower-lying valleys were flooded.
So land masses that were once firmly physically connected to the mainland by dry earth were just severed.
They were cut off, becoming isolated islands surrounded entirely by deep, treacherous sea currents.
And one of the most geographically crucial pieces of land that experienced this severing was the island of Iki, right?
Yes, sitting right out there in the middle of the Tsushima Strait. Iki was once part of a continuous terrestrial landscape.
But the rising ocean separated it completely.
Consider how this profound geological event would be processed by the people who lived through it. They watched their world physically tear apart.
Over generations, that visceral memory of the land being severed from the mainland by the rising ocean was burned into their cultural consciousness.
It became a survival story, a warning, and eventually a sacred history passed down orally around the fires.
And that very real physical separation of land and sea was eventually mythologized.
Exactly. It evolved into the grand, cosmic story of the separation of heaven and earth that we read about in the Chronicles.
Wait, so the separation of heaven and earth is not a poetic, abstract metaphor for the creation of the universe from a gaseous nebula?
Not at all. It is the inherited, deeply traumatized memory of the Jomon transgression.
Oh, wow. And this geological reality forces us to redefine the true identity of Taka-Ama-Hara.
It absolutely does. If the separation of heaven and earth is just the severing of the landmass by the sea,
then Taka-Ama-Hara, the place where Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi first appeared, was never some magical realm in the clouds.
Taka-Ama-Hara was the newly isolated island of Iki, positioned squarely in the middle of the Tsushima Strait.
The sea level rose, the land was separated, and this newly formed, incredibly vital maritime territory was created.
And remember, it was surrounded by some of the most complex, dangerous ocean currents in the region.
The scale of human resilience here is staggering when you think about it.
It really is. Think about what it takes to colonize that newly separated island.
Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi is navigating these unpredictable, newly formed straits.
Right. The currents sweeping through the Tsushima Strait are notoriously brutal. They can easily drag a primitive vessel out into the open ocean.
Yet he successfully leads a group of people across that violent water to the isolated island of Iki.
This true physical Taka-Ama-Hara. He figures out the seasonal winds, he discovers the safe natural harbors.
And he establishes a permanent settlement.
Yeah.
He was the ultimate maritime colonizer.
He earned the revered title of Nushi, the chief, not through divine right, but because he was the very first to tame that specific unforgiving environment.
He basically cracked the code of survival in the middle of the sea.
Exactly. But, you know, This introduces a massive historical friction.
Kind of friction.
Well, if he was the first to settle this incredibly vital territory, an island that eventually becomes the central hub of all the major ancient sea routes.
Why does his legacy just stall out?
Right, why did he remain just a Nushi, a localized village chief, while other figures in the chronicles go on to become absolute rulers?
You would think the founder of the most important maritime hub would become the founding king of the whole region.
The text actually answers this, if you know how to read the political coding.
The story shifts from a chronicle of human survival against nature to a record of a massive ancient geopolitical clash.
Yes. To understand why the original pioneer was sidelined, we have to look closely at the very next major figure who appears in the ancient chronicles.
Right after Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi vanishes, let me guess, this new figure isn't just another village chief.
Far from it. This figure is named Takami-Misubi, but he is also widely known in the records and by later shrines by another highly specific title.
Which is?
Takagi no Okami.
Let's freeze on that title for a second. Takagi no Okami. You pointed at a crucial structural difference in the hierarchy here earlier.
Yes, our original pioneer, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi, was a Nushi, but Takagi is an Okami.
And in the strict social and political hierarchy of the ancient world, titles are not interchangeable adjectives.
Exactly. They represent binding physical realities of power. Okami is a title strictly reserved for a ruling monarch.
A supreme leader who commands a wide territory, extracts resources, and wields centralized authority.
So the fact that the chronicles refer to Takagi as Okami immediately signals that he is the ruling monarch of Taka-Ama-Hara.
I'm trying to picture the mechanics of this takeover. You have the original settlers, the descendants of the Nushi, holding this island.
Right. They know the currents. They have the established fishing routes.
So how does a new monarch just sweep in and depose them? Did Takagi no Okami just arrive with a massive armada and slaughter the local chiefs?
Or was it a slower economic strangulation, right? Well, to find the mechanism of that takeover, we have to cross the sea.
Look at the historical records of the great empires on the continent.
Yes. The Chinese historical records, specifically the highly detailed texts of the Shiki and the Kanjo, provide a stunning simultaneous parallel.
Oh, wow. What do they say?
They document the voyages of a famous envoy named Zhufu.
Zhufu. This is the envoy sent by the first emperor of China, the Qian emperor, around 219 BC, right?
That's the one.
The legend always says he was looking for the elixir of immortality.
While the myths talk of immortality, the physical reality was a massive expedition of colonization and resource acquisition.
Makes sense. So what happened when he sailed east?
According to these continental records, Zhufu sails out into the eastern seas and eventually encounters a powerful local ruler.
Known in the texts as the great deity of the sea.
Yes, and the specific title recorded is Kaichu Okami.
Kaichu Okami, the supreme monarch of the sea. That aligns flawlessly with the title and location of Takagi no Okami.
The physical historical analysis overwhelmingly suggests they are the exact same figure.
So Zhufu navigates the treacherous straits and encounters this powerful local monarch, Takagi no Okami, who is ruling over Taka-Ama-Hara.
But Zhufu is not just a wandering explorer, you know.
Yeah.
He is an agent of a massive, technologically dominant empire.
He needs a secure base of operations.
And to get it, he strikes a monumental deal with this local monarch.
This is where the history stops being about individuals and starts being about the sheer crushing weight of technological advantage, doesn't it?
It really does. Zhufu didn't just bring gold or silk to trade. He brought an entire civilization's worth of advanced crafts.
The records state he arrived with a fleet carrying 3,000 youths to bolster the population.
But more importantly, he introduced wet rice agriculture. He introduced the knowledge of iron making and smelting.
And he brought written characters.
We must consider the catastrophic impact these advanced crafts would have on a foraging society.
Before this arrival, the people of Taka-Ama-Hara were skilled fishers and foragers.
Right, their societal structure, led by descendants of the Nushi, was likely somewhat egalitarian.
Because it was constrained by what the sea and the rocky island could naturally provide.
Exactly. There is a limit to how much power one chief can amass when food cannot be stored indefinitely.
But wet rice agriculture changes the fundamental math of human survival.
It changes everything. Suddenly, you aren't just hunting for your daily calories.
You are reshaping the land, building irrigation systems, and producing massive yields of grain that can be stored for years.
And storable surplus creates wealth, and wealth creates class stratification.
You suddenly need people to manage the grain, guard the storehouses, and distribute the rations.
Alongside this agricultural revolution, Zhu Fu introduces iron.
Which is huge, right? Because the indigenous population was likely relying on stone, bone, or perhaps imported bronze tools.
Iron is a completely different paradigm. Iron axes can clear dense ancient forests in a fraction of the time.
Creating more land for rice paddies.
And iron weapons provide an absolute, undeniable military monopoly over neighboring islands that still use stone or bronze.
Finally, you add written characters to the mix.
You introduce the ability to record complex administrative data, track food surpluses, and communicate orders across distances.
Without relying on oral messengers, it is a complete societal rewrite.
You drop mass agriculture, iron metallurgy, and a written administrative system onto an island of foragers.
And the original Nushi leadership structure is rendered instantly obsolete.
The individual who controls those new advanced crafts dictates the future.
So Takagi no Okami aligns himself with Zhu Fu, absorbs this massive influx of resources, technology, and population.
And solidifies his power beyond anything the old village chiefs could imagine.
He transitions from a local ruler to the absolute Okami.
With this new alliance, they take complete, unopposed control of the maritime routes through the Tsushima Strait.
And once you have iron weapons and endless rice supplies, an isolated island in the strait is no longer big enough to contain you.
Their expansion was inevitable. Utilizing their vast economic and military advantage, this newly empowered alliance moves from the island of Iki across the straits,
Pushing deep into the fertile northern plains of the Kyushu mainland.
They systematically conquer and establish vast territories perfectly suited for their new wet rice agriculture.
This powerful, technologically advanced alliance eventually gives rise to the great royal lineage that will command the entire archipelago.
This is the origin of the lineage that ultimately centers itself in Yamato-u. And again, let us emphasize the precise ancient pronunciation here. Yamato-u.
Yamato-u. So Takagi no Kami rides this overwhelming wave of continental advanced crafts and brilliant geopolitical maneuvering to become the supreme founding figure of the ruling Ko lineage.
But erasing an entire previous civilization from the land is one thing.
Erasing the original founder from the cultural memory of the people is much harder.
Exactly. Where does this new iron-wielding regime leave our original pioneer, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi?
It leaves him systematically excluded from the halls of power.
Right. Because Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi was simply the original local colonizer, a gritty village chief from an older, simpler era of foraging and survival, he had no male blood tie to this new, incredibly powerful Ko lineage.
Well, he was not part of their dynasty.
He did not possess iron, and he did not cultivate rice. Therefore, he was utterly irrelevant to their claim to supreme authority.
They couldn't claim him as a grand ancestor, so they just wrote him out of the functional parts of the history.
We can observe the physical proof of this deliberate exclusion by looking at the religious architecture of the Ko lineage.
Specifically, we look at the Hashinden.
Yes. The Hashinden are the 8 sacred shrines specifically established to guard the central residence of the Ko.
They represent the absolute inner circle of ancestral royal protection.
The deities enshrined there are the ones the Ko lineage claims as their direct legitimizing ancestors.
And Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi is completely absent from the Hashinden.
Completely absent.
That feels like the definitive historical receipt. If he truly were the supreme, unassailable creator of the universe and the ultimate ancestor of all rulers, he would be the absolute centerpiece of the Hashinden.
His exclusion proves he was an outsider to the Ko regime. He was not their ancestor. He was the predecessor whose land they absorbed.
But the central political narrative faced a distinct problem.
The local memory of Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi as the first to arrive on the islands was likely too deeply embedded in the oral traditions of the maritime people to completely delete.
So the Ko lineage employed a brilliant political strategy.
They kept his name at the very absolute beginning of the official records to appease local traditions, but they emptied him of all substance, power, and narrative.
They stripped him of his royal status, erased his real physical achievements as a pioneer, and turned him into a solitary god who instantly vanishes before their history begins.
They took a flesh-and-blood pioneer who fought the tides to keep his people alive, and they paved over his life, turning him into a sterile, blank slate.
But the fascinating dynamic of history is that cultural and religious landscapes abhor a vacuum.
Oh, absolutely. By engineering this historical blank slate, The Ko lineage inadvertently made Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi the absolute perfect vessel for later, entirely different religious movements.
Because the ruling regime attached no specific stories, no heroic deeds, and no rigid dogma to him.
Later generations of theologians could project whatever spiritual architecture they needed onto his name without contradicting the official state narrative.
He goes from being an erased local chief to becoming the ultimate theological catch-all deity.
The void left by his political erasure was rapidly filled by evolving religious thought. We see this accelerate in later centuries with the development of highly sophisticated abstract theology.
Scholars and priests grouped him together with two other deities.
Ironically, including his old political rival, Takami-Musubi, they formed a triad known as the Zoka Senshin, the three fundamental gods of creation.
It is a stunning irony. They take the man who was physically pushed out of his terrestrial territory by a rival faction, and they elevate him into a philosophical architect of the universe, sitting right alongside the man who ousted him.
Right. At shrines like the Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi shrine in Okayama or the Amatsu shrine in Kyoto, his transformation is absolute.
In these sacred spaces, there is not a single trace of the salt-stained sailor navigating the Tsushima Strait.
He is worshipped as a supreme abstract creator, a deity who offers absolute, almost mystical protection from physical harm, disaster, and disease.
He becomes a figure of intense, serene, philosophical devotion.
But the evolution of his identity gets even wilder and more theatrical than quiet philosophical contemplation. We have to talk about what happened in Chiba.
Yes, because the way his blank slate was utilized there is visually and culturally spectacular.
The Chiba Shrine stands as perhaps the most dramatic, vivid example of this later distortion. Here, the empty vessel of Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi is completely synchronized with a massive, highly structured foreign belief system.
He is seamlessly merged with Myoken, the Buddhist and Taoist deity representing the North Star.
I want you to picture the sheer scale of this synchronization. At the Chiba Shrine, they do not treat him like a distant, quiet architect of the void.
They treat him like a dynamic, pulsating king of the stars.
During their New Year's events, the shrine sees over 600,000 visitors pouring through its gates over just 3 days.
It is a massive, overwhelming throng of humanity seeking favor.
And if you look at their February festival, they utilize this incredible, heavy architectural feature.
A vibrant two-story structure with a balcony jetting out 5 meters high in the air.
The high balcony is the focal point of the ritual. They position 100 people up on that balcony, chosen specifically for their good fortune that year.
Standing 5 meters above the sprawling crowds, they hurl beans down into the masses to aggressively drive away evil spirits.
It is loud, it is visceral, it is packed with kinetic energy.
And they host the Myoken Festival, an event that has run completely unbroken since the year 1127.
Think about that. Over 9 centuries of unbroken, highly orchestrated devotion.
In this massive, spectacular setting, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi isn't a forgotten village chief of a tiny island. He is the North Star itself.
He is the fixed point in the celestial sphere, answering earthly wishes, granting luck, and protecting the entire city.
He becomes the unmoving center of the cosmos around which everything revolves. It is a brilliant piece of religious synthesis.
But this adaptability did not stop with mapping him to the stars. He was also drafted to protect the waters, though in a manner entirely detached from his gritty, original maritime roots.
You're referring to the Suitengu belief system.
Yes. Centered largely in Kurume, within Fukuoka Prefecture, the Suitengu belief system is a complex tapestry.
It wove together various tragic historical legends, specific local water deity worship, and later Buddhist elements.
Because Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi was the supreme unattached name at the top of the cosmological hierarchy, they pulled him into this framework as well.
In the Suitengu tradition, he became revered as a supreme, benevolent protector of the seas, and crucially, a divine guardian ensuring safe childbirth.
Safe childbirth, stopping plagues, controlling the North Star, fighting off evil spirits from a 5-meter balcony. It is just layer upon layer of later religious needs piled onto this one name.
Every time a community needed a supreme, unattached authority to anchor their new belief system, they opened the ancient chronicles, looked at the first name in the book, and used that empty vessel.
The historical reality was completely buried beneath a mountain of subsequent faith.
Okay, I have to stop here and pose a serious mechanical question about the research.
Go ahead.
If this man's real identity has been completely buried under centuries of North Star worship, under dense Buddhist and Taoist syncretism, under the Suitengu water beliefs, and under the grand philosophical theology of the Zoka Sonshin, how on earth do we prove where the actual flesh and blood man came from?
It's a great question.
Trying to find his original identity feels like trying to find the original wooden foundations of a house after it has been paved over by a 5-story concrete skyscraper. Have we not lost the historical trail completely?
That is the exact challenge that physical history is designed to solve. When you are looking at centuries of accumulated cultural noise, you never find the truth by staring directly at the loudest parts of the distortion.
You find the truth by looking for anomalies in the data.
Exactly. We have to bypass the later philosophical centers and look closely at the records in his own original backyard.
His backyard being the ancient web of maritime routes around Kyushu and the Western Islands.
The actual physical geography where he first sailed. To decode these records, we have to understand an unbreakable rule of the ancient Shinto naming tradition.
In this highly structured, localized system, a shrine cannot simply change a deity's name or arbitrarily upgrade their title on a whim.
It isn't like swapping a title on a modern document. In this oral, deeply traditional culture, a name is a binding physical contract with the ancestors.
It dictates lineage, territory, and historical reality.
The name is the fundamental architecture of their identity. Now, we established earlier that the title Okami is strictly a monarch's title, representing supreme ruling authority.
Outside of the ancient maritime center, in distant places like Chiba or Okayama, you might see shrines casually use the title Okami for him.
But that is only because of the late-stage theological upgrades we just discussed. They upgraded his title because they were synchronizing him with the Supreme North Star or the ultimate cosmic creator.
But down in the ancient maritime world where the actual events happened, they didn't have the luxury of inventing titles.
The local, generational memories were too deep, and the political reality of the Ko lineage was too present.
In his ancient backyard, the naming rules were strictly governed by historical fact and central decree.
So the researchers looked at the official shrine records. They compared the data between two major regions of this ancient sea web, Fukuoka and Nagasaki.
Let's lay out this map for you. Let's start with Fukuoka. Geographically and historically, Fukuoka is the absolute heartland of the ancient maritime clans.
The powerful seafaring families who eventually controlled the trade routes and integrated with the central Ko government were based here.
When researchers examined the official registries in Fukuoka Prefecture, they found 16 shrines dedicated to Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi.
Okay, 16 shrines in the heartland. Now, we check the specific titles used in their official names.
Out of those 16 shrines, 15 of them call him just a god or a lord.
Yeah.
Use the standard localized titles.
Only a single shrine in the entire prefecture, the Marishi Shrine in Winakata, uses the supreme monarch title Okami.
A ratio of 15-to-1. That perfectly matches the official historical reality dictated by the central government.
To the powerful clans of Fukuoka, who were deeply aligned with the ruling Ko lineage, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi was nothing more than a predecessor.
He was the old Nushi, the village chief who was there before the real rulers arrived with iron and agriculture.
He was absolutely not their monarch. The shrine records in Fukuoka faithfully reflect the official, downgraded narrative decreed by Yamato.
That makes perfect sense politically, but then the data shifts as we move westward. We look at Nagasaki.
Nagasaki is geographically further west, pushing out away from the mainland, looking directly out into the vast, open expanse of the ocean.
In Nagasaki Prefecture, the total number of shrines dedicated to him is smaller. There are only 10 shrines in total.
But here, the titles warp in a way that demands our attention. Out of those 10 shrines, 4 of them aggressively use the supreme monarch title, Okami.
Wait, I need to make sure you grasp the sheer friction of that statistic. In the aligned heartland of Fukuoka, it was 1 out of 16. A tiny fraction.
In Nagasaki, it is 4 out of 10. Almost half of the shrines are blatantly calling him the supreme monarch.
That is a massive statistical anomaly.
It is a glaring, deliberate deviation from the official rules of the central government. But the researchers didn't just stop at the prefectural level.
To understand why this anomaly exists, we have to zoom in closely on the map of Nagasaki.
I am visualizing the jagged geography of Nagasaki right now. It is a complex topography of long coastlines, deep peninsulas, and scattered island chains.
Where exactly are these 4 Okami shrines located?
Of those 4 shrines that stubbornly refuse the central narrative and use the Forbidden Monarch title, 3 of them, the Kashirako Shrine, the Mabushi Shrine, and the Takigawara Shrine, are all clustered tightly together in one highly specific, incredibly remote area.
They're located in the Minami-Atsura district.
The Minami-Sura district, for those not familiar with the local geography, where is that positioned?
It is located in the northeastern part of the Goto Islands.
The Goto Islands. This is a rugged, deeply isolated chain of islands sitting way out off the extreme western coast of Kyushu.
So you have this incredibly tight cluster of 3 shrines built right next to each other in this remote island district.
And they are all uniformly defying the official decrees of the central government.
This brings us to the ultimate historical mystery. Why? Why would this one specific, isolated cluster of islands stubbornly risk the ire of the central government?
To use the highest possible monarch title, Okami, for a man that the ruling authorities in Yamato-u had explicitly dismissed as a mere irrelevant village chief.
Why would they break the strict sacred rules of naming?
They wouldn't break a sacred naming rule over a distant philosophical concept. They wouldn't risk defying the co-lineage just to copy the star worshippers in Chiba.
There had to be a deeply visceral, personal reason burned into the local identity.
The physical historical study brings us to a profound, inescapable conclusion. The Minami-Matsura district in the Goto Islands was not just a random location on a map.
It was his actual homeland.
It was either his literal birthplace or the very first staging ground where he gathered his people before launching his colonization efforts.
The geographic starting point is finally revealed.
Consider the psychological reality of the people living on those remote islands. To the distant central authorities in the fertile plains, Ame-no-mi-Naka-Nushi was a forgotten Nushi.
A minor footnote in their grand, iron-forged political history.
But to the locals of the Goto Islands, he was not a footnote. He was their direct flesh-and-blood ancestor.
I am picturing the generational storytelling here. He was the great pioneer.
He was the man who taught their ancestors how to read the brutal currents of the East China Sea.
He was the man who taught them how to build shelters that wouldn't blow away, how to secure food on rocky shores, and how to survive on the extreme edge of the habitable world.
He was the one who led their people to establish the very first foothold in this terrifying maritime frontier.
Exactly. This cluster of shrines is not a clerical error. It represents a profound, multi-generational rebellion of memory.
Out of fierce loyalty and deep, unshakable ancestral pride, the people of the Goto Islands completely refused to accept the downgraded narrative pushed by the central authorities.
They categorically refused to call the founder of their civilization a mere local chief.
To them, he was the greatest leader they had ever known. He was the architect of their survival. To them, he was, and always would be, their Okami.
It is a beautiful, quiet defiance against an overwhelming empire, written permanently into the very names of their local shrines.
The rest of the archipelago allowed his physical reality to be erased, turning him into a star or a void. But these islanders kept his true, gritty legacy alive on those remote shores.
And we find a brilliant, hidden corroboration for this geographic origin in the ancient myths themselves.
If we go back to the Kojiki, past the opening lines about the solitaire gods in the void, we eventually reach the myth detailing the birth of the physical islands.
The primary creators are said to give birth to the land masses of the archipelago in a specific sequence.
The mythological map-making of the islands.
Yes. The 5th island born in this grand mythic sequence is called Chikashima.
An exhaustive historical geography has firmly proven that Chikashima is the ancient original name for the Goto Islands.
So the Goto Islands are explicitly recognized and named early in the creation myth.
But the crucial detail lies in the mythic spirit name assigned to this island. In this tradition, every major island has a formalized spirit name that defines its essence.
The spirit name recorded for Chikashima, the Goto Islands, is Ame-no-Oshiwo.
Ame-no-Oshiwo. There is that exact linguistic root again, ame.
It proudly holds the word aim, which, as we established at the very beginning of our journey, translates strictly in the ancient Jomon tongue to the sea.
The Goto Islands are literally codified in the deepest layers of the mythology as the absolute domain of the physical sea.
When you look at the physical geography, the logic of this is undeniable. Imagine you are standing on the Goto Islands.
They form the extreme western edge of the Japanese archipelago.
If you are standing on those cliffs and looking westward, there's absolutely nothing but the vast, terrifying expanse of the East China Sea.
It is the ultimate geographic gateway.
For any ancient maritime people moving eastward across the open ocean or attempting to navigate the powerful, sweeping, warm currents, the Goto Islands are the very first point of contact with land.
They serve as the critical threshold to the inland seas and the mainland.
So if you have an ancient leader whose name literally translates to the chief of the islands in the middle of the sea, it is the most logical, physically grounded theory in the world that he would have started right there.
He built his strength, honed his maritime skills, and gathered his people on the extreme western edge in the Goto Islands.
And from that staging ground, he launched the grand, dangerous colonization effort, moving eastward into the treacherous Tsushima Strait.
Eventually settling the island of Iki, the true physical Taka-Ama-Hara.
He was the pioneer who first unlocked the web of maritime routes. He was a master navigator, a relentless survivalist, and the founding leader of his people.
The later ruling Ko lineage tried to systematically erase his physical reality because his existence as the original founder did not fit their royal Iron Age narrative.
The later theologians tried to transform him into a distant, abstract star or a mystical protector.
But the raw geography, the ancient language, and the stubborn, fiercely protective pride of his direct descendants in the Goto Islands preserved the physical truth of who he really was.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started with a deity who seemed completely untouchable, a being made of pure, abstract, cosmic void who appears in the chronicles only to vanish instantly.
But by reading the violent physical geography of the Jomon transgression, we found the real Taka-Ama-Hara, the newly isolated island of Iki.
By performing linguistic archaeology on the lost Jomon tongue, we stripped away the illusion of the sky and found the raw, physical reality of the sea.
We tracked the ruthless geopolitical takeover driven by Jufu and Takagi no Okami,
detailing exactly how the sudden introduction of advanced crafts like wet rice agriculture, iron smelting, and written records allowed the Ko lineage to push the original Stone Age pioneers completely out of the historical narrative.
We bypassed centuries of spectacular religious distortion, looking past the massive 5-meter balconies and bean-throwing crowds of the Myokan star festivals and water protectors of the Sutengu beliefs.
And finally, by hunting down a glaring statistical anomaly and understanding the strict, unbreakable rules of ancient titles as physical contracts, we found a cluster of fiercely proud shrines in the Goto Islands.
We found the real salt-of-the-earth pioneer.
This journey raises a profound question for you to consider as you look at the world's histories.
When we examine the grand pantheons of any culture, when we read about the abstract spirits, the cosmic voids, the untouchable forces of creation that exist outside of human struggle, how many of them are completely fabricated?
And how many of them are actually the fiercely guarded hyper-local memories of real human pioneers?
How many gritty flesh and blood survivors are silently waiting for us to stop accepting the theology and start reading the geography of their survival?
It changes how you view every myth ever written. It makes you realize how many incredible stories of pure human endurance are hidden right in plain sight, just waiting for someone to peel back the layers and decode the map. Keep exploring. Farewell.